Jorge Heine is a former Chilean government minister and ambassador to China. He says Wang Yi's visit to the United States comes at a time when the world is facing more complex challenges.
If anything, the situation in the world has deteriorated since then. Now we have, in addition to the war in Ukraine, we have the situation in Gaza. So things are quite dire, and it is important for the leaders of the great powers to exchange views and see how this can be fixed somehow.
Well, Wang Yi did emphasise that need for deepened dialogue between China and the United States. So do you think that is about geopolitics, or it's about trade, about climate, about technology?
Well, I think they are all really together. Obviously, the most urgent thing, I would say, is the situation in Gaza right now that can very easily get out of hand. So it is important for the United States and for China to talk about it and see how any escalation can be prevented. But in the background to that are all the issues that you mentioned, and that obviously need some resolution as well. It's going to be a 3-day visit. Expectations are that Foreign Minister Wang Yi will not just be received by Secretary Blinken and the National Security Advisor Sullivan, but also by President Biden, all of which I find encouraging.
You say it's encouraging, and you also did mention that APAC meeting. So do you think that this is really about doing some of that groundwork ahead of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit coming up in San Francisco?
Absolutely. The point is, you know, the presidential participation in such summits cannot be done in a vacuum. There's a lot of groundwork, a lot of staff work that needs to be done before something like that can happen. And it is my impression that that is very much one of the priorities that Foreign Minister Wang Yi will have in this visit.
Let's look ahead a bit further, because they're obviously working on building the relationship and ties in various areas. Will maintaining good relations get more difficult, do you think, as the focus turns, certainly in the United States, to elections?
Yes, obviously the electoral climate is not conducive to that, but it cannot be avoided. You know, the world needs to be managed. And if that is not done by the great powers, you know, it is difficult to know who is going to do it. So, despite the challenges, this is something that seems to me that both the U.S. and the Chinese diplomacy have to take head on. And in that regard, I would identify 2 areas, now more in the bilateral relationship than in the world situation, that need to be addressed. The United States has been insisting, it seems to me, far too aggressively on what has been called economic warfare on the chips front, for example, and in other areas. And perhaps it would be a good idea to tone that down a little bit. On the other hand, the U.S. would like to have exchanges and conversations on military matters. China has been reluctant to do that. Perhaps it can acquiesce to it. And those, it seems, are 2 areas in which you know, they could find common ground and move the agenda forward.